Hey everybody, this is the Vikings-Broncos post-game show. This is Purple Updates with your host Joe Johnson, owner of VikingsTerritory.com and PurplePTSD.com. The Vikings just pulled off a historic comeback to win the game 27-23. Holy shit. Wow. All right, I'll see you guys next week. Yeah, I mean, to be down 20-0 at halftime, to show no signs of life in the first half, to see what I said during the half game show, the desperation from people in the chat, from myself, saying things like, this is going to age poorly, especially if they win. They very well could win, but I was very upset about certain things that are kind of obvious. This game should have never come down to the wire. I don't think that the Broncos are on par with where the Raiders were when we played them earlier this season, or where the Falcons typically are this season. Their defense is good to great, or really actually great to elite. But the Vikings came out really, really flat in this game. I mean, it was just bad. The defense was doing its thing, which for the most part this past month plus has been being extremely porous, except for in this example, they weren't a bend don't break defense. They were just a break and what's a good word? Break and explode. I don't know. They played horribly. I'm talking to my girlfriend, who is a newly converted Vikings fan. She has been a Packers fan for her entire life. I don't think she understands how I watch football, which is by not watching it. I hide. I was outside for the last play, watching through a window like a pedophile. Extremely nerve-wracking. I mean, I cannot get over how, oh my God, what a relief. And will you check that this is streaming on your phone?
Yeah.
Go to YouTube. I want to double check, 'cause we've had some tech issues. I expected to see more people in the chat that would be celebrating with me, but they're probably out running around the block to burn off some steam, like I would if I wasn't morbidly obese. But yeah, what a game! What a second half! I can't say enough about the second half of. I can't say
meta.
enough about. Okay, so things are working.
Second half of
I am not pleasant to look at. Cousins, I think this was his best game of the season. Granted, thank you. Granted, the first half was awful. I think the difference between the first half and the second half is we saw Cousins getting out of the pocket, being more mobile. We saw more misdirection screens, the type of stuff that I said both before the game and at halftime they needed to do. They just need to stick to that. I don't know why they go away from it, especially against a team with a front like Denver with Von Miller, who may be having a down season, but he's still freaking Von Miller. The reason that it's so hard for people to stop what's worked for us is because on paper this team, position by position, is just more talented than every single team that we've met this season. I mean, look at the second half. Look at, on defense, Harrison Smith going down, and then you have Curse come in and just play spectacularly. I mean, I will say first that final throw to Fant was a blatant push-off. The refs made some weird calls in this game. The touchdown where they should have blown the whistle for a lack of forward progress. They had that weird call where they gave the Broncos a new set of downs after the field goal, and they changed it, thankfully, because that was a terrible call. It's just another example of the refs being bad. I give them credit for coming back from that, but I stick to what I say and the anger that I had at halftime, because a championship team does not come out flat like this. This felt a lot like the Buffalo game last year, but worse because there weren't a ton of turnovers early that put them in the hole. It was just play. Now, again, the defense for the Broncos is good, so I'm not as upset about that, but it's the defense allowing yet another backup quarterback to carve them. This game ended up feeling a lot more like the Packers game, except for Cousins is playing better. So he didn't make the mistake that he made in the Packers game, which was to throw a really bad touchdown or interception in the red zone. But Cousins' line for this game is astounding. 29 for 35, 319 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. He did have a fumble, but since the Bears game, his numbers have been spectacular. And I think at this point, I mean, even in our live chat, you still hear people ripping on Cousins for this or that. I'm really fully committing to the pro Cousins bandwagon again. I don't really think, despite the fact that I just brought up that Packers interception, last season, he had no offensive line. For the beginning of the season, he carried this team. Yeah, Tang, I know. I don't know if you saw that. I don't know if you're behind, but they weren't using the Vikings offense, Cousins or Cook, the way that they have been, and the way that they have been, by that I mean successfully. The misdirection screens, getting Cousins out of the pockets, so on and so forth. They went back to that in the second half, and it worked. It worked right away. So they just need to, again, this team is so talented that you don't need to get gimmicky or outthink yourself and say, okay, well, they're expecting this, so we won't do it. They can expect it, and you can still be better than them. That's really how football works at the end of the day. And Cousins Cook is so talented that you don't need to do that. He just beats people. He gets to the edge, which is really hard for anybody to do with all the speed in this league. Cousins is just playing on another level. He's making throws. That touchdown to Diggs, the touchdown to Rudolph was wide open, but he's making the right decisions and he's executing those throws. What is his stat line now since the Bears game? Completion percentage in the 70s. You have one interception against 19 touchdowns, I think, 18. They are playing he is playing MVP level statistically. And I said, I got a lot of grief for it at the time, but when I was advocating for Cousins to come here, you can Google purple PTSD, and I'll be the one to say it. The Vikings need to go all in on Cousins. You'll find my article. I was probably the first media member to come out and say that. And I said that with the talent on this offense, in the skill positions, that Cousins had the ability to be a top 5 quarterback statistically and in regards to the MVP race. And I said that I was really struggling as to whether or not to put him in the top 3. I feel validated in that. At the time, I thought, when I was arguing that, I thought that the Vikings would really use the draft and the remainder of free agency to bulk up the offensive line, the interior of the offensive line. They clearly did not do that until this year, and I think we're seeing the results of that. I think we're also seeing how valuable Josh Klein is to this offensive line, especially in the first half with Dakota Dozier not playing well. God, what a game. What a freaking game. It's hard for me to really be super negative, but I have to be realistic. I have to calm down and say, again, championship teams do not come out this flat at home against a team of this caliber. I still don't think they're really qualify as a trap game because of their defense. But whatever it is, they need to figure it out. They need to figure it out quickly. Now, I do want to defend a couple other people, not Curse as much because everyone loved Curse in the preseason. But I think we've had this rotating argument each week of who should get cut, Rhodes or Diggs, or Rhodes or Waynes. And I've been a Waynes Bobo. Actually, I'll tell you guys really quickly. Trey Waynes is the reason that I started Purple PTSD in the first place, because there was this article by Arif Hassan before the 2015 draft focusing on Waynes' shuttle run. What happened was he ran his 4.240, pulled his groin. Then he had to do the shuttle run. Shuttle run, you use your groin muscle a lot. His shuttle run results were in the bottom 10 percentile if you go to mockdraftables.com. And so not knowing that he was injured, Arif basically said, yeah, he can run really fast straight ahead, but he can't turn and cut and keep up with receivers. Now, he'd only allowed 2 touchdowns during his time at Michigan State, so I kept asking people on Reddit who took what Arif said as basically gospel and were really against us getting Trey Waynes. I said, well, show me on the tape at Michigan State where he's a Frankenstein who can't turn, or a robot or Roomba that just goes straight. That turned into like a month-long arguments with a few guys. Once we drafted Waynes, those guys were like, yeah, Trey Waynes, Mike Zimmer's a cornerback guru, rah, rah. And I said, well, you guys hate Trey Waynes. Why are you pretending like you like him now? They said, if you're so smart, leave. So I put that out there as full disclosure because I've always been on Waynes' side. I'm a big Big Ten guy. It was a big Michigan State defense guy at the time with the no-fly zone situation there. And I think the way that he played in the second half, and especially towards the end of the game, showed that if they had to make that decision of him versus Rhodes, it's not even close at this point. Rhodes got burned more than once in this game. Waynes has been bad at times this season. He's had an up and down season. It's probably been his worst season as compared to the last 2. But he showed his ability to tackle, that tackle for the loss that he had, his ability to step up in the run game. Between him and Curse, they're the ones that won this game at the end of it. They're the ones that stopped the Broncos from scoring. So I just a shout out to Waynes because he doesn't get any credit. I think he's the most underrated Vikings player on this defense. He has been for a long time. I think a lot of people are still thinking about like his rookie and sophomore years where he's getting a lot of pass interference calls and he was playing 10 yards off, so on and so forth. So if I were to invest one versus the other, obviously Rhodes is only 29, but he looks 50. He's just too beat up perpetually, and he's getting way too much money for what he's doing. My cats are gonna knock down my background, but I don't care because the Vikings won. I can't believe it. What was that stat in the last 5 seasons? Teams down by 20 or more points at halftime in 99 different games had won 0 of them. Anyway. RN, are you talking about Rhodes? Oh, yeah. No, Rhodes was a nightmare yet again, and I don't see, outside of him taking a year off to get completely healthy, how he's going to bounce back. He's getting older. He's going to be 30. It's just not working for him. So, I'd be a lot more comfortable with Waynes and Hill and Hughes than Rhodes, Hill, and Hughes. And Tang, so Tang says that Rhodes is playing soft coverage, and that kind of touches on something I was going to say about Waynes when he first came here. A lot of people were really upset that he's always 10 yards off, as if he has the ability to make that call. That's not how it works. Zimmer wanted Waynes to play that far off because Waynes was indecisive, and despite the fact that he was the fastest guy in the field, that he could catch up if he ever did get beat off the line, he just didn't have that confidence yet. And now it hasn't been the case. But the idea that Waynes was just going rogue on every play and he was supposed to be playing man and bumping at the line, but he was 10 yards off because he was too tentative, that Zimmer would never allow that. Do you remember there was like one play in that Packers game a couple years ago with Terrence Newman and everyone said it was a mutiny because they kind of waved off what Zimmer had said and they did something else, and then it came out that wasn't really the case. If Waynes at the time had been playing 10 yards off, first of all, that throws off the entire defense because this defense is, and all defenses, but this one especially, is predicated on everyone doing their part and no one having to overextend themselves to compensate for somebody else. So if he was just making this random decision on every single play, he would have been benched and cut. Rhodes now is doing that, and Zimmer's doing that because he doesn't trust Rhodes, exactly like you guys are saying. So that's a sign of his just decline, and I think that's goes without saying. Tang said, can we admit that our secondary, especially the cornerbacks, are not good anymore, and that Rhodes, there's something just made it look good when he was great? Yeah, I think that it's a little more complicated than that. I think the lack of pressure up front, not just like blitz pressure, but general pressure when you're just rushing 4, has been bad. I know Linval's out, and he's not necessarily a guy who gets a ton of QB pressures, but he takes up a lot of blocks. The offensive line has to obviously scheme for him more so than when he's not playing. Uh, but you would think with Daniil Hunter and Everson Griffin having this bounce back year that we'd have more pressures, more sacks. I mean, the Broncos were the seventh worst. Seventh worst? Yeah, seventh. Sorry, seventh worst team in regards to sacks, and it's just we weren't getting any pressure at all yet again. And I think that does put a lot more pressure, ironically, on the secondary because they don't have that help. But they're the Achilles of this defense, and it is more so the corners, more so Rhodes, Wayne's intermittently. Hughes has not played great at times. He's been picked on. Mackenzie Alexander, same thing. I mean, he's always been an up and down guy. That shows like maybe a couple games of flashes, and then he'll have a mental error here or there. There was that touchdown last week against the Cowboys where Kendricks tried to catch up across the middle, the slant, where the guy was wide open. That was on Mackenzie Alexander. So I was using a lot of that at halftime when I was really mad because, again, the four main guys in Rhodes, Waynes, Mack, Hughes are first round, second round. First round, Holton Hill, undrafted free agent, but at least a second round talent. Zimmer is known as a cornerback guru, and suddenly the defense is struggling at his most, what's the word I'm looking for? At what we're supposed to be best at. That we spent the most draft capital on, that we're spending the most capital on. When you look at Rhodes being a top 5 highest paid corner. I don't know how you fix that at this point. Maybe you bench Rhodes, maybe you let Hughes and Hill come in and trial by fire until the playoffs, should they make the playoffs. It's a precarious situation to be in. It's very disconcerting because like we've been talking about, the fact that Rhodes is playing 10 yards off a la Wayne's his rookie season is bad. And so a lot of people in the live chat today were like, do they have the guts to bench Rhodes? I certainly think so. I mean, I don't think Zimmer is afraid to bench anybody. Maybe he or Spielman is a little too proud to cut a first-round pick. It took him a while to make that admission with guys like Patterson or Treadwell. But at this point, something has to change. They have the bye week to figure it out. Thankfully, they won this game because, man, it had been a rough 2 weeks for us to have to deal with figuring out the disaster that was losing this game. I mean, again, this was on par with the Bills game. Not exactly apples to apples, but it was still, it was arguably worse to let this offense carve you up like that without the turnovers. There were turnovers, but they came later. Again, the Bills game, I think there was 2 or 3 turnovers, 2 fumbles, or 2 interceptions and a fumble from Cousins. You're talking about a trade for corner, well, like a Jalen Ramsey thing. Because the question is with Jalen Ramsey, which is obviously not going to happen now. The trade deadline's over. He ended up getting traded to the Rams. I never thought giving up 2 first-round picks was going to be a good move. It's hard to say because they are so invested in this team that you would think that would get them over the hump. But at the time, this defense was playing, I think, better than it is now. They weren't at least relying on the offense as much to win games. And you would have been sacrificing the future to win now, and that would have been under the assumption that Ramsey would have come in, immediately knew the system, and improved on, which was at the time, I think, a defense that was allowing like 15.5 points, which was less than the 15.8 they allowed in 2017. Since then, things have been worse. The secondary has been worse. It makes the theoretical idea of getting Ramsey a lot more attractive, but I still wouldn't give up 2 first-round picks for him. I don't think any player outside of a franchise quarterback like a Mahomes would be worth 2 first-round picks, or Jay Cutler, like the Bears gave up back in the day. But yeah, I really I'm worried about the secondary. And I like to think, and I've said this a bunch of times, that if anyone can figure this out, it's Zimmer. But the fact that it even exists is an indictment on Zimmer's ability to do what everyone says he can. And so I guess I shouldn't say I trust him to do it. Maybe that cornerback guru thing works or worked back before people had copious amounts of tape to see what Zimmer's system is as a whole. And I think people, if we've learned anything from Zimmer, he doesn't do well against the elite offensive-minded coaches in this league, Sean McVay, Doug Peterson, Andy Reid, and he's not very good at like mid-game adapting to change. The halftime changes that teams make. Look at the Saints game in 2017. We had no answer for the adjustments that Sean Payton made after that. They completely shut them out in the first half. In the second half, they just got destroyed. Zimmer isn't that great at thinking on the fly or making adjustments to his game plan. And I just don't know at this point if it's as much of that, if it's a scheme issue, if it's an execution of that scheme, or if it's on kind of like an execution thing, but if it's the players just not being able to do it anymore. I think it's like a mixture. I think it's a pie chart or maybe a Venn diagram with three, like the symbol for the Olympics without two of the rings. I'm not high, I swear. But I just, the fact that it is those three things, I don't know how you fix it. Outside of benching Rhodes, but then you have to ask Hughes, coming off an ACL with maybe 9-10 games under his belt, to do something that Rhodes couldn't do, that Waynes couldn't do, which is learn this system as a young guy this quickly while acclimating to the speed and physicality of the league. I just don't have faith in that either. Holton Hill has looked great in spurts, but he's been exploited in spurts. Hughes is the same way. We saw that last week. I think a lot of people are, especially when it comes to internet football arguments, there's whether it's somebody on Reddit that's anonymous or on Twitter or somebody like me that attempts to do this for a living, or guys on ESPN. People don't want to admit when they're wrong. That's across the board. It's not just sports. But so you have people who were advocating for Hughes all year. They were this preseason, before we even knew when he was going to be back. A lot of people were calling for Hughes, and so a lot of people are looking at what he did last week with these rosy glasses on, saying like, "Oh, I'll just ignore the bad and look at all the good," because he was bad in the first half, and then he had these near splash plays in the second half. He had that amazing hit that was legal. I love that. He had almost 2 picks, one being a pick 6. But you have to take the good with the bad. And so I don't think anything is as simple as people make it out. It's not as cut and dry as these arguments online end up being. But there's a huge learning curve here, obviously, and I just don't think that the combination of Hughes or Hill is going to be, at the end of the day, that much better than what Rhodes is doing. I'm praying that he, finds some stem cells or something during the bye week and fixes his ailments. He said that was the reason why he had a down year last year. He claimed he was healthy. There was a big front page article in the sports section of the Star Tribune about his new workout routine, Pilates and yoga and less strength training and more flexibility training. And he's looked hurt since the first preseason game. And I don't even know if that's it. At least last season we saw him get injured. We saw his ankle look dislocated or broken. We saw his knee. And a lot of people like to joke that he was just feigning injury because he got burned. This season he's just been hobbled the entire time. I think that's the new normal for him. And on top of that, I think he's just lost his speed, all of it. So when you have that missing part of the defense, it throws everything out of whack, as we've seen. He was such a leader. He was so physical. He's a big corner. He's 6'2", but he's big. Wayne's is over 6 feet, but he's very slender. And so not having that physical corner who can jam the number one receiver on the other team at the line and not let them, start their routes cleanly. Losing that has been huge. And instead we've turned Rhodes into this guy who plays 10 yards off and just follows their number one receiver. So instead of jamming him and slowing them at the line, you're letting him get a full head of steam, and then you have Rhodes, who's injured, attempting to keep up with him in their cuts. That's not going to work, and it's clearly not working. So maybe as I'm thinking aloud and doing this, maybe going with Hughes will be better. He's not a very big guy. I would almost Holton Hill is over 6 feet. I would put him more as the guy if we're doing man-to-man jamming, that sort of thing, even though Hill isn't as big as Rhodes either. Yeah, Tang, I mean, I mentally, I said that during the halftime show. I think his frustration isn't so much about losing or anything. I think it's him either consciously or subconsciously admitting that he just can't do it anymore. And that's a very hard thing for these guys to deal with. I can't imagine it. I still have anxiety dreams about hockey from my youth, and I sucked. These guys play on like the highest level. They've always been the best guy on the field their entire lives, and to lose that is very, very hard for them to admit. Anyway, the positive, let's look at some of these stats. Dalvin Cook tore it up, lit the field on fire, 10 carries, 26 yards. Yikes. Ironically, the Broncos were, I think, 17th in rush defense and 4th in pass defense. So I think that's another huge plotted for Cousins, who looked every bit the MVP that some think he could have been. I don't think he'll ever win that this season. That doesn't make sense. I don't think he'll win it this season. I don't think Cook would either. I think they both kind of cancel each other out. They split votes that way. And then people say they have each other, so maybe they aren't really MVPs. They're just good players. But I'm just a huge shout out to Cousins, and I'm not doing that to pat myself on the back as much as I'm doing it to say that he, like Wayne's, deserves credit when he's playing well. And he's been playing like the quarterback some of us thought he could be since the Bears game. Now, the fact that I have to say since the Bears game, I think should mean something to me. Like, I should say, well, the fact that I'm saying he played that badly against the Packers, but I think it's more complicated than that. Again, I don't think this team knew what to do with him, or what was successful for him coming off of last season, because there was just no way to know what his bottom was, what his top was, what situations worked, which ones didn't, because he didn't have an offensive line, he didn't have a running game, he didn't even have an offensive coordinator who wasn't at least fighting with the head coach for the majority of the season. So I think it took him a few games this year to find out what makes him comfortable, and they go away from it. They went away from it in the Chiefs game, they went away from it in the first half of this game, throwing those screens to Cook, getting out of the pocket, so on and so forth. I know I'm being repetitive, but the team needs to. I'm doing it for effect because the team keeps going away from it, and then they apparently aren't learning their lesson. But yeah, I mean, I just am so psyched that they won this game. I cannot believe that they pulled it off. It is just extremely, extremely important that they won this game. I think this would have been the nail in the coffin, regardless of what happens the rest of the way. I mean, they're going, after the bye, they're going to Seattle to play the Seahawks. They do have 3 division games at home. But losing this game when they couldn't pick up a win in Kansas City against a backup, or against the Bears with a backup, considering how tough the NFC is right now, considering that the Vikings are the 6th seed, or at least they were going into this game. Losing this game would have been, what we would have been looking at the end of the season and saying, yeah, man, if we would have won that Broncos game, this would have been completely different. Yeah, but I agree. We see what works, and I understand that you can't just keep doing the same thing for the most part. You have to change things up because teams get tape of it. They scheme against it. But we have Gary Kubiak, who is arguably one of the best, not even arguably, he's one of the best offensive minds in the history of the NFL. I think they need to go with what he thinks. I think that the stuff that we've seen in the run game, it can be obviously linked to Kubiak and Rick Dennison. The tight end stuff, Kubiak. The difference with Cousins getting out of the pocket, I think that's a huge Kubiak thing as well. I think they say Stefanski was his idea to bring Kubiak in. I don't know if that's really true, if they just did it to save face with Stefanski, but I do think that as the season has progressed, they've leaned more and more on Kubiak. And I think they just need to keep doing it. I mean, I would not even be against Kubiak just being the offensive coordinator at this point, because I do think, and I don't really have a lot of proof for it outside of the difference between when Stefanski was the offensive coordinator at the end of last season and the first few games of this season, and then the improvements with the offensive line, not just the new players, but the zone blocking scheme, Cook's emergence. Not to take anything away from Cook physically, but I think that this scheme is perfect for him. Granted, a lot of his production comes from him cutting back against the line, but we just need to keep doing that because, again, nobody can look at, especially when Thielen comes back, you have a team that is more talented position by position than any in the league. Just play the way that works, and you'll see, especially against a team that you're supposed to beat. I would argue if they played the way they did this on offense, scheme-wise, during the second half of this game, the entire game or the Chiefs game, this today would have been not close, and we would have won that Chiefs game. So don't get too cute. That was the key to the game that I had before. I think that I nailed it, and I think that I'm the best. But I appreciate you guys coming in. Every time I pause, I'm just reading your comments. Are you talking to me? I do trust Kirk not to pull that Packers game type moment again, for the most part, because he hasn't done it since. I mean, nobody's perfect. Aaron Rodgers threw an interception in the end zone when he didn't need to earlier this season. It was a horrible decision. It was first down. He did not need to do that. I don't know why he did it. He was running while he did it. But at the same time, I'm not going to punish him forever for it. I mean, the only interception he's had since then was the one that bounced off Diggs' face mask. He's got nearly 20 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's got an incredible completion percentage. He's got a ton of yards. Could it happen again? Sure. But he's had a ton of volume. I mean, the reason we won this game was because of Cousins. It wasn't because of Cook. He had 319 yards, 3 touchdowns. And so even if he were to have that moment again, and I'm not saying run the offense through him. I do still think everything comes from Cook. I do think that Cousins is best. Peak Cousins out of play action bootlegs, play action rollouts. That having been said, I don't think that you restrict Cousins down the field because of a play that happened week 2. The reason they brought Cousins in the first place was because Keenum couldn't make the throws that Cousins can make routinely. Keenum had basically 2 options each play. Look down the field. That doesn't to one person. If that doesn't work, check down. That's mostly what the offense did. He just had a really good ability to pick up yards with his legs and escape and then create plays beyond that. And the defense was also playing at a historic rate, shutting teams down on third down, I think like 77% of the time. But again, so they brought Cousins in because he could make all those throws. He could take advantage of the fact that you have Diggs and Thielen and Kyle Rudolph and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say to all of a sudden do what maybe they did in the Chiefs game, which is just have Cousins stand in the pocket and air it out down the field like he's Randall Cunningham or something. But I don't think that you restrict him in any way. I think today's a really good example that he can step up. I think this game is probably the best example of this season of him winning the game without the help of Dalvin Cook. But it still goes through Cook. I don't think that you can continue to do that, but I think it's very, very important that at this point in the season that Cousins came out in the second half and lit this team up. Without Adam Thielen. I think that's a huge testament. I think that should give him some credit with fans. But there's people who are never going to like him I don't know if it's the money. I don't know if it's people who still are sad about Teddy Bridgewater. It doesn't really matter. But at this point, yeah, I mean, I'm very happy with this win. I'm very happy at how Cousins played and has been playing, and Cook had 26 yards, 50 total. This was a really low production game for him, and for them to come out and win in the second half showed heart. I'm still not really happy with some of the stuff on defense. The penalty that gave them that field goal. How many fourth downs they converted on that last drive. I mean, this is supposed to be a stifling defense. We were supposed to be at home. It was supposed to be loud. It worked out in the end, but it shouldn't have been this close. It should have been this nail biting. I shouldn't have been in my front yard feeding squirrels during the game. So yeah, they won though. I don't know why I sound so angry. I always look angry. I shouldn't sound angry. I agree. I guarantee you, Tang, that they got a ton of offers before the trade deadline from a ton of teams for Teddy. The question is, yeah, I mean, it depends on if Breeze comes back next season. Because it would suck for Breeze to go another season and then retire, and then Teddy is on another team as a franchise guy for the next 10 to 12 years, assuming his body can hold up that long, which I really don't think it will. But I do think Teddy showed what he can do with talent around him, which sounds a lot like the Vikings. I understand that. But things ended up being the way they were. I do think that Cousins is a better quarterback than Teddy. I didn't watch a ton of his stuff in New Orleans, but I know that when he was here, he had a lot of problems with deep balls because he had a little bit of a sidearm that he was working on before he got injured, and I think he was showing that he had changed his throwing motion a little bit. But I never was sold on him being an elite quarterback just because of his down the field issues. But he is a very clutch quarterback. I mean, he had ice water flowing in his veins. I remember Zimmer would say, "I just wish Teddy would play the first quarter like he does at the end of the fourth quarter," because he was just so lethal at the end of the games, and he had some come from behind victories. But yeah, Teddy's going to get paid one way or the other. In 2015, I went to 7 of the 8 home games. Was that the last season at TCF? Or was that 2016? Either way, that's why they brought Treadwell in, because every passing play was, say this is the field, up, button hook. Say this line right here is first down, they go 15 yards, button hook, catch. That's really all they did. They brought Mike Wallace in. He would get wide open down the field, and Teddy would overthrow him every time because he was throwing line drives. They brought Treadwell in because Treadwell was known as a guy who was good at contested catches, who was big, who was physical, who could do that. He could run 10 yards, turn around, jump up, and get the ball. All of a sudden, he gets hurt. Pat Shurmur's there. You start doing more real NFL offense things, slant passes, down the field stuff. Wide array of options, and Treadwell doesn't fit in there. He's really a one-trick pony who I argued during the draft season that year wasn't even really that good at that one trick. If you look at his mock draftables, he has no ups, no upper body strength. What do you need to get contested catches, especially like in the end zone? Ups and upper body strength. So I was never a big Treadwell fan, but I think that was really the reason why Treadwell never worked out here is because they brought him in for a specific goal, and it didn't work. My cats are destroying my house, so I'm going to go, but I am very happy, and I'm glad you guys stuck around and asked questions and participated in this. I really enjoyed doing this with you guys. I will be back tomorrow. I'm going to be rolling out a daily show with more graphics and editing and what are those? Oh, God. I gotta go. My brain is not working because I was so stressed out. But thank you guys for stopping by. The Vikings are going into the bye with an amazing win. Cousins killed it, and I guess all is kind of well in Vikings land. So, Skol, and we will see you guys tomorrow.